He spoke of the unlimited power of conditioning and environmental control to mold the behavior of animals and humans alike. To study the power of conditioning, Watson used infants as subjects, as you can see in this original footage from the 1920s. Watson showed that strong emotions could be learned in one situation by conditioning and then generalized, that is, transferred to other similar situations without having to repeat the original conditioning. Watson and his assistant, Rosalie Reyna, conditioned the infants to fear a white rat they had liked at first. In this case, they worked with an 8-month-old called Little Albert. Each time the rat was presented, a loud gong was struck, startling the infant. Soon the appearance of the rat alone was enough to make him cry and become fearful. This was classical conditioning at work. When the child crawled away from the rat towards safety, her behavior was rewarded in that her fear was reduced. Instrumental conditioning was now at work. Later, when the children saw any stimulus that was similar to the rat, a rabbit, a dog, a fur coat, a mask, their learned fear was generalized to all of them. The once fearless children were now easily frightened by a host of harmless things. Watson's pioneering study was controversial because of the way he used children. Such an experiment could not be conducted today because of strict ethical guidelines governing the treatment of all research subjects, humans and animals.
Picking up where Watson left off, Skinner wants to do the rigorous science to prove that environment is everything. Change the environment, he argues, and you can change the individual. Or in Skinner's case, the pigeon. During World War II, Skinner had developed a pigeon guidance device for the U.S. military. While the Russians had dogs carrying bombs, and the Swedes had seals to blow up mines, Skinner had a plan of his own. Teaching pigeons to guide missiles to an enemy target. At the time, however, the military had no missiles to guide. But Skinner's pigeon research did not go to waste. He develops a system called operant conditioning to prove that a behavior will be repeated by a subject when rewarded. Repetition leads to reinforcement. Reinforcement to changes in behavior.
This hungry pigeon is moving about more or less at random. Sometimes it turns its head to the left. When it does, we reinforce that movement by giving the pigeon access to a dish of grain.
Skinner then waits for it to turn further. Again, more food. Ultimately, the pigeon will turn in a complete circle, having learned that only when he turns will he be rewarded.
What Skinner was able to do in very carefully controlled studies with animal models was they demonstrate that whole chains of behaviors could be built step by step so that literally you could teach a pigeon to do complicated behaviors that no one would have predicted possible.
And Skinner believes that if it works for pigeons, why not people? In Skinner's mind, behavior is behavior, up and down the evolutionary scale, and it is all learned. One of the great successes is in education. People are taught to do more complicated tasks than anyone had thought possible by breaking down behavior into small steps and giving positive reinforcement along the way.
The word culture in a social sense is defined as a set of shared attributes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution, organization, or group. The most obvious, yet often overlooked example of the mechanics of culture is the fact that we are provably shaped by the sort of society we live in. The language you use, the gaming strategies you execute for survival, the perception of beauty you lust for, the familial patterns and traditions you perpetuate, and the deeply held theology, myths, and urban legends that define your broadest view are all examples of the qualities you might absorb arbitrarily from the culture you have been born into. In fact, if you dig deeper, you find that there is really nothing that we cognitively think and believe which isn't first presented to us in some environmental form. An insulted man who pulls out a gun and shoots somebody had to learn at some point in his life what a gun was, how to pull the trigger, along with what he was to find insulting to begin with. Every word that I am saying has been learned one way or another. Every concept relayed is a collective accumulation of experience. A Chinese baby taken at birth and raised in a British family in England will develop the language, dialect, mannerisms, traditions, and accent of the British culture. Needless to say, it is obvious the profound effect the environment has on behavior. While there is always a debate about genetics and environmental influence, which, by the way, as I mentioned, Roxanne Meadows will go into at length later in the program, it's very easy to understand in the context of values, meaning what you think is important and not important, that information influences or conditioning is coming from the world around you. Make no mistake, every intellectual concept which each one of us finds merit with is the result of a cultural information influence, one way or another. The environment is a self-perpetuating programming process, and just like designing a software program for your computer, each human being is advertently and inadvertently programmed into their worldview. To continue the analogy, the human brain is a piece of hardware, and the environment around you constitutes the programming team which creates the values and perspective. Every word you know has been taught to you one way or another, and thus every concept and belief you have is a result of this same influence.
It's a system of indoctrination of the young. That was the way the liberal elites regard it, and they're more or less accurate. So the educational system is supposed to train people to be obedient, conformist, not think too much, do what you're told, stay passive, don't cause any crises of democracy, don't raise any questions, and so on. That's basically what the system is about. Even the fact that the system has a lot of stupidity in it, I think, has a function. You know, it means that people are filtered out for obedience. If you can guarantee lots of stupidity in the educational system, you know, like stupid assignments and things like that, you know that the only people who will make it through are people like me and like most of you, I guess, who are willing to do it no matter how stupid it is, because we want to go to the next step, you know. So you may know that this assignment is idiotic and the guy up there couldn't think his way out of a paper bag, but you'll do it anyway because that's the way you get to the next class, and you want to make it, and so on and so forth. Well, there are people who don't do that, you know. There are people who say, I'm not going to do it, it's too ridiculous, you know. Those people are called behavioral problems, or something like that. They end up in the principal's office or in the streets or selling drugs or whatever. And all of this is a technique for selection for obedience. And I don't know how to prove this, but I have a feeling that when you go to the elite universities, you find more obedience and conformity, probably because you're getting the students who were better able to do it. You know? Well, all of that is functional. That's the way it works. And it works right through graduate school. I mean, by the time you get to graduate school, it's already a little more varied because some real contradictions develop in the system. The problem is that you can't have progress this way. You know, now, especially in the sciences and engineering, that's a problem because the corporations need science and engineering. You know, if you don't have innovation, you're really in trouble. So they have to encourage creativity and independence.
Human beings' motivation can come from many different places. When you're a child, you have all sorts of interests that you pursue. You have all sorts of creativities that you find fascinating. You don't know what money is. You don't need incentive to do something. Einstein and Galileo, all of these great men that contributed, they didn't need money as incentive.